I am definitely.
Yeah. Harsha, I think we're good to go, right? Right. Okay. Let's make a start again. So, welcome to the Creative Leadership Series, where we interview remarkable individuals from across the world on matters relating to creativity and leadership. We live in truly challenging times, a world that is ever more interconnected and complex. And despite our advances in technology and the difficulties in in what we're facing right now, we're forced to face these new societal challenges, which are systemic and require us to think and act differently. And perhaps the biggest challenge of our lifetime, this menacing pandemic. Navigating ourselves into a better future requires creative leadership, the courage to create a future that is worth living into through times of uncertainty. And this series of conversations explores creativity and leadership at a deeper psychological level. And I'm truly honored to welcome someone who has inspired millions of people from across the world through his writing. He's an author of a number of bestsellers, such as The Legend of Vance, Gates of Fire, The War of Art, and Turning Pro. And I'd be hard pressed to think of someone who has perhaps at once mastered both the art of creativity whilst being able to communicate it to the masses in such a riveting way. Steve, thank you so much for being with us here. It's an absolute honor.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Rajiv. It's great to be here, and let's see what we can do.
Yeah. I mean, just tell us a bit about where you are right now, and what time is it? Because it's on the other side of the world.
I'm in Los Angeles, and it's about 10 o'clock in the morning here, and I'm in my office. You can see my ancient typewriter back here and some other stuff here. And speaking of the Bhagavad Gita, we have this from Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda's translation, the 2-book thing.
Incredible.
So I'm just in my office in the morning.
Wow. So no weekends off for you then?
No weekends off. When we finish, I'll go to work.
Oh, fantastic. This year has obviously been, this year just gone has obviously been an incredibly tough year across the spectrum, whatever discipline we've been in. How has this year been for you as a writer?
The interesting thing is that the writer's life is not that different from the lockdown life. I mean, so, it's been a real challenge in that all the bad stuff that's going on out there. We're going to start talking about resistance with a capital R pretty soon.
Yeah.
That bad stuff that's out there politically, the virus, all of this stuff is just a natural, man-made or otherwise distraction, a thing that will call to us and keep us from doing our work, right? It's very easy to become obsessed with what's happening out there because it's so negative and so scary. And it's very different. It's very easy to become, if we're stuck at home, to go off the deep end one way or another. I mean, I myself find myself waking up at 3 a.m. and, obsessing about all the crazy stuff that's going on and what am I going to do? And so, but that is really, for me, not that different from my regular writer's life. Even when things are great out in the world, there's a lot of turmoil and a lot of distractions that I put up myself in between my own ears. And a big part of my life, my inner life, is disciplining myself to dismiss those things and to focus on whatever project or whatever it is I'm working on or just my own evolution as we're going along.
Yeah.
So it's been harder, this new world, but it hasn't been qualitatively different for me. Quantitatively, but not qualitatively.
Yeah. I mean, I can see you've been very active on the videos and been watching your warrior archetype, which we'll probably touch on as well. Is there anything in particular that you're working on right now, like a book or something?
Say that again, Rajiv. What?
Yeah. Is there anything in particular that you're working on right now?
Well, yes. I have a new book, if you'll forgive me. I have a new book coming in March called A Man at Arms. It's a novel, kind of like Gates of Fire.
Okay.
And I'm involved in promoting it right now. You know, it's coming out in only a couple months. So that's mainly what I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 months, which is new for me because I've always been a believer in just doing the work, doing the writing, and not doing any promoting.
Yeah.
But these days you just have to.
Got to do it.
So yeah, so that's what I've been doing. And I'm always working on something new. So I have other new stuff going as well.
Great stuff. So let's go into the real the meat of the topic. And the topic today is about overcoming resistance on the battlefield. So if we were just to set the scene for the viewers, the scenario, we're all in this battlefield, a writer looking to write, an architect looking to design, and even a political leader looking to bring about some sort of reform. And when we think about these things, especially given that it's a new year and people are making resolutions, a new diet, a new enterprise, there's a certain excitement, but there's also this one thing, and you said with a capital R, that seems to hold us back. And I know in this book, you start off with, we live 2 lives, the lives that we currently live and the unlived life. And there's just something that comes in the way. Can you elaborate on
that? Yes, I'll be happy to elaborate on it.
Yeah.
I think all of us who are listening to this today, and you and I, whether we are writers or artists or in any kind of creative field, we know I'm sitting in front of my computer now, and I know that when I sit down in front of this thing in the morning and the screen is blank in front of me, I feel this negative force radiating off of the screen at me. And the object, the aim of that force is to stop me from doing my work. And that's the force that I call resistance with a capital R. And I can tell you, when I first started writing, maybe the first, I don't know, it was like a 7-year period where resistance just beat the hell out of me nonstop. I mean, destroyed my marriage, destroyed most of my life, what it was, before I finally, because I was completely unaware of it. I was unaware that there was this force. I just thought I was a bum. I was a loser. I was weak. I was sick. I couldn't get it together. And then for me, when I finally sort of gave a name to it in my own mind, and I said, and I believed in its existence, because before I didn't really believe in its existence. You know, I thought, why would there be this negative force, you know? But there is. And once, you know, I'll digress just a moment. In Jewish mysticism, there's the concept that we live on one plane, on the material plane here, and that above us is the plane of the soul, the higher level of whatever you want to call it. And that we on the lower plane are trying to reach up to this higher plane for help. You could call it prayer. You could call it a writer or an artist sitting down at their desk and saying, you know, give me an idea, help. We're trying to reach that higher level. And at the same time, that higher level is trying to reach down to us and help us in a positive way. The old thing that they say in Kabbalistic studies, that above every blade of grass is an angel saying, grow, grow, grow. But The trick is that in between these two planes, there's a third force, and that's resistance. And that's the force that's trying to stop the soul from reaching down to us and trying to stop us from getting up to it. So once I kind of, in my own mind, gave a name to it and realized that there really was this negative force, that changed everything for me, because at least I knew each morning, one of the things I say in the War of Art is that it's not the writing that's the hard part, it's the sitting down to write.
Absolutely.
And that's absolutely true. In other words, once you sort of dive into the cold pool and start swimming, then you warm up pretty fast and you can swim. It's when you're standing on the edge of the pool, shivering and going, how am I ever going to jump into that pool? That's when you're in trouble. So that is a sort of a nutshell version of what I call resistance. And I really feel that the artist's main job, any artist at all, architect, comedian, actor, filmmaker, or just anybody in their regular life, Mother Teresa, their main job is not to do their art, it's to overcome the resistance to doing the art will come, but it's getting over that negative force that's the real killer.
You've got to be like a willing instrument for that art to flow through you, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, but you also have to be a kind of a warrior to take on this negative force, and you have to develop mental toughness and certain habits, certain professional habits that allow you to show up every day ready to work and not to allow yourself to be sabotaged by your own resistance.
See, so one of the things, if we just touch a bit more deeper onto the nature of resistance, it's felt but it's invisible, and in your book you talk about the fact that it's always opposes in this one direction. So it's never from it's always when you're aspiring for something higher that this resistance comes. And the other thing that I found remarkable was that it recruits allies, which I thought was fascinating. And this idea of some sort of collective resistance that forms around you, the people around you trying to kind of almost hold you back.
Yes, let me, before I address that directly, Rajiv, let me just talk a little bit about the form that resistance takes, at least for me.
Yeah.
And I know from a million emails I've gotten, it's the same form it takes for everybody. One form it takes is you'll hear a voice in your head. Let's say you have a project that you want to do, a book you want to write, a movie you want to make, whatever. The voice in your head will start to say, and it'll be like your voice. You'll think it's you talking to you. And the voice will say something like, you're a bum, you're a loser. Who do you think you are to take on this project? It's been done a million times before and much better than you'll ever do it. Don't even think about it. You're too old, you're too young, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're the wrong color, you're the wrong, whatever. All of these voices you'll hear in your head trying to kind of talk you out of doing it, disqualify you. Just as a classic example would be like when Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic solo in 1927. I'm sure that the voice of resistance said to him, are you crazy flying across the Atlantic all by yourself? Who are you? You're just a male pilot, MAIL, and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, what's diabolical about resistance is when it puts up these reasons why you're not good enough. A lot of times, some of them are true. Like if you think about Lindbergh, it was really dangerous. It was really difficult. And who was he? But to think he could do it. But in any event, that's one of the forms that resistance will take. The other, the emotional effect, is resistance is primarily experienced as fear. That's what we'll feel. That's the real emotion that we'll feel when we're, sitting down to the typewriter to write the next book or whatever. We'll be terrified to do it. What if we fail? What if we humiliate ourselves, et cetera, et cetera? And beyond that, what if we succeed? That's an even bigger fear.
Yeah.
But the other aspect, as you were saying, Rajiv, that resistance does recruit others, and there is a sort of a collective resistance. It's like, if some of us like to go to the pub, right? And we may have a bunch of friends, and every night, we go down to the pub and we have a pint, we have another. I know nobody's going to the pub now, but, speaking in general, right? And all of us are sort of, with our buddies, we're kind of mired in a level of mediocrity. We just go down there, we get a little bit pissed, we come home, we go to sleep, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, if one of us were to suddenly say, I've got a dream. I've got a nonprofit I want to start. I want to go to medical school. I want to run a 4-minute mile. I want to write a novel, whatever. And if that one person starts to actually do it, starts to organize themselves and do it, what's going to happen is all of their friends are going to turn against them and are going, and this is resistance recruiting allies. And they'll say things like, Rajiv, you were such a great guy. It was so much fun hanging out with you. You used to be just a great guy. You were down here every night with us. Now look at you. I call you up. You won't go out with me. You're too busy working. What do you think? You're better than the rest of us? And the reason that people do that, our friends, is not that they're bad people, but it's that they themselves have their own resistance to their own thing. Each one of them has, whether they'll admit it or not, a kind of a dream or a vision of the realized person that they could become. And they know they're not following that dream. They know they're wasting their lives. They're down at the pub having a pint and a pint and a pint, right? And so when you, Rajiv, you start living your dream, you become a reproach to them. Because it's like they say to themselves, even if it's unconscious, they say, how come Rajiv is doing that and I'm not, So they'll try to bring you down. And the happiest they'll be is when you give up that dream and you come back to the pub and hang out with them every night. And the other weird thing to me is that the closer somebody is to you, the more they're going to try to bring you down, unless they themselves are pursuing their own dream. Then it's a whole different thing. But
that's interesting.
It's your own brother, it's your own spouse, that because they're the most threatened when they see you coming into your own. And so now the upside of this is, people always say, when you start to pursue your dream or start to really live your life, you might have to leave some friends behind. There are friends you just can't be friends with anymore. But the good news is you make new friends. You make new friends that are pursuing their dream and are a positive influence on you. And pretty soon you find yourself saying, I really can't hang out with Joe and Charlie and Mac like I used to. I got to make new friends, over here with Paul and Jerry and Fred or whatever. And it's a sad thing. There's a lot of kind of tragedy to that, but did you ever see a British movie called Withnail and I? Does this ring a bell? It's a great movie, and it's about these two young actors. Richard Grant plays one of them. I forget who the other one, and Richard Grant is great. And they are into booze, into drugs. They're just living at the utter edge of poverty, and they're great friends. And the story is that one of them gets cast in a part, and has a chance to kind of move out of that sort of the pub world I was talking about, only it's it's a comedy. It's actually very funny, but it's heartbreaking because he does have to leave his friend behind. And the title, Withnail and I, Withnail is one of the guys, one of the two actors. And his other friend has to kind of leave him behind to follow, to live out his own destiny. It's a great movie. I highly recommend it. For us in America, they needed to have subtitles because the British accents are so thick we can't even understand them. But it's really great. Withnail and I.
It's a bit like the it's a bit like the Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, where there is that initial sort of incitement to
Yes.
adventure, and then there's always that kind of, you're always pulling yourself back. And one of the manifestations which and again, this was a big distinction for me when I read your work, is rationalization.
Yes.
We want to save ourselves from the shame of not being able to pursue our dreams. And rationality is our saving grace. And it's almost, I think in your book, you talk about how resistance doesn't come full on. It's not, it takes a cunning form in the form of rationale. I thought that was really interesting.
The thing about resistance, among many other things, is it's really diabolical. It's like an enemy that is just brilliantly creative and changes shape, shifts, takes all kinds of forms, and it's just trying to seduce you or to terrify you or to somehow stop you from doing your work. And like you say, we justify our not doing our work. We rationalize it, right? We all do this. It's not like the other bad thing about resistance is we feel it in ourselves and we think, oh, I'm the only one that's sabotaging all my friends. They're great. They're working hard. But the truth is everybody, it's resistance is a force of nature, just like gravity. Everybody, believe me, I've gotten thousands of emails and they're all the same. People will tell me, oh, I hear this voice in my head and here's what it says. And it's exactly what everybody else's voice is. But we'll always, rationalization is a great thing or it's a bad thing, really. It's what really screws us up because, like I say in The War of Art, we tell ourselves we are going to write our symphony. It's not that we're not going to write it. We are going to write it. We're just going to start tomorrow.
Procrastination, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing with rationality is it's always providing you with evidence from the past. It's never about the future. It's never about what can happen. It's all about using examples of where people have failed and no, you're not going to be able to do that. We're held hostage by our past.
Yes, if we let ourselves. And that's where, and just to make, I know it can sound as I'm talking here and people are listening, like I've got a handle on this, but let me tell you, I don't. I mean, I'm just starting a new book over the last few months, and resistance is as strong as it ever was, even though I've been doing this for 50 years. And that voice in my head is telling me, this book is the dumbest idea you've ever had. You're going to humiliate yourself with this book. Nobody's going to be interested in this. You're a loser. You can never pull, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just having to fight my way through this by force of will. But I'm not immune to it by any means. I don't mean to make it sound like that.
And is there something to be said about this, that you can't, just so I used to do martial arts, and one of the things in martial arts is you're always trying to use your opponent's strength. So you'd be daft to try and face them head on if they're a lot bigger and stronger than you, and you'd be daft if you were going to run away because you're going to get tired because they're going to keep chasing you. Instead, it's about acknowledging it and maneuvering yourself. So just letting it be there, because maybe it's always going to be there, but the acknowledgement of it, just perhaps over time, it just stops becoming an issue. You can live with it. Would that be right to say?
I would say that's true, but it's a little different, I think, than using its strength against you, like in martial arts. I think it's more that it really has no strength of its own, except what we endow it with. If we allow ourselves to be afraid of it, then we're afraid. Yeah. But once we it's like the Wizard of Oz. You pull the curtain away and there's really nothing there, but it's terrifying while it's the curtain. But let me ask you something, Rajiv. What in your life prompts you to feel resistance? And are you fighting a battle yourself against this force right now?
Yeah, I think one of the big resistances that I've felt is this notion, and this kind of whisper, it's not perfect yet. and
Ah,
and 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 it's not so much thinking I'm not perfect and I'm not good enough, but it's almost like waiting for the perfect situation to manifest. Like, now it's time, now it's ready. And I've noticed that in a lot of endeavors that I've wanted to do, it's been that thing, like the situation is not quite right, and you're forever trying to manipulate it so that it is.
and how do you counter that?
It's interesting because I've shared this with people. So in some of our creative circles, I've actually we've done a few sessions where we try to acknowledge our inner contrarians, the things that are constantly pushing us back, our resistances. And what I found helps is surrounding yourself with people that recognize your natural resistance, and they can just call you out on it. Um,
That's great.
and I found that helps a lot. Yeah.
Ah, now that's sort of what goes back to just what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago about how you make new friends as you
Yeah.
sort of start out on the road, right? And it's
Yeah.
great that that you're surrounding yourself with people that they know that themselves, they've been through it, they recognize it, and they will call you out on it. And
Mhm.
as another sort of to expand upon this a little, like that argument that resistance is using on you, that the situation is not perfect,
Yeah.
is really nuanced, subtle, diabolical, because I'm sure that the situation really isn't perfect, right? It's not like, you know,
Yeah.
and resistance somehow knows that that'll work with you, Rajiv. That's like your
Yeah.
weakness.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
there was a blog post that I wrote a while ago that just said perfectionism equals resistance, which is the same. It's just one form that it takes. Like, because of course, we want something we're doing to be the best it can possibly be. We don't want
Mm,
to expose it to the world when it's a ragged mess. Then on the other hand, there's a certain point, realistically, professionally speaking, when you got to say it's good enough. Now, and what you're really afraid of, and I don't mean you, Rajiv, but anybody, me too, when I would use that thing, is we're afraid of the moment of being judged.
yeah.
We want it to be perfect so that nobody can say, hey, this is bad, you're a bum.
Yeah.
But it's never going to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
Um, I used to have, I had an agent when I was a younger writer. And I remember there was one time where I was just at the very end of a book and I was trying to make it perfect. I kept he wanted the book to take out, bring the publishers. And I kept saying, it's almost done. It's almost done. He said to me, where are you with this? And I said, I'm close. And he said, close is good enough. Give it to me. And, so that's kind of like your friends calling you out on something and saying,
Yeah.
stop being a perfectionist. That's resistance. Get the book out there.
I think just closely related to this need to have a perfect setting is the need to know that what you're expressing, especially in the creative sense, is worthy and important. And I think just maybe away from the arts and moving a bit towards kind of leadership. We live in a world where you put one foot wrong and you're scrutinized like anything. Like the entire media machine will be on to you, especially if you're some sort of leader, and especially if you're a political leader. I think. Do you think that? I mean, is that just something that we've just got to embrace? Like this is reality, and like we just got to go with it, or is there something fundamentally wrong in society that we need to change? Give people a break, essentially.
Uh, I think it's that you cannot let yourself think that way and worry about those critics or something. Again, it's like what I was saying. The critic has his or her own resistance,
Mm,
right? They're dealing with mostly a lot of times critics are people, let's say professional critics or even amateur critics, are people who, let's put it in the realm of writing. They're people who want to write. They have a novel in them. They have other novel, you know, they have some sort of thing and they're not doing it. So when you do it, they love to pick you apart, you know? So it's their own resistance. Again, you're the man in the arena taking the blows, and that's the honorable place to be. So I'm a big believer in not reading reviews. And even when it's negative, I just blow it off as best I can. You know, I just dismiss it, because my job is to follow my own star. My job is to write what I want to write now, and then write the next one and the next one. And I don't care. I mean, I'm human. It hurts when people knock stuff, but almost always it's their own resistance. You know, anybody that's out there that's a writer and that's been published on Amazon, they know this story. You look at the reviews, and maybe there'll be 90% of them will be 5 stars or 4 stars. And then there'll be like 8% that are 1-star review, right? And you just realize, you know, you think about your own book, if it's yours, you say, hey, it may be bad, but it's not 1 star, you know? And obviously those 1-star people are jealous. They're haters. They're people who are not living out their own dream. And so they have to tear down somebody that is. But I do think it's definitely, you're right. These days, people are out there on Twitter and they're ready to tear you down the minute you do. But you just have to, you know, the hell with them, dismiss them. They don't count. You got to keep going ahead and doing what your muse tells you to do.
Thanks. Just the final point on resistance, just for the people that are listening in. Is there like a particular question that we should almost regularly reflect on to get us more in tune with what our particular resistance is, or for us, what shows the most? Is there any pointers that you can give for that?
Well, I'll make a couple of points here, I think. Yeah. One thing is, it's kind of a law of resistance, I have found, that the more important a potential project, a book, you know, a startup, whatever it is, the more important that is to our own evolution as souls, the more resistance we will feel to it. If it's just a little tiny thing, the step, then we won't feel hardly any resistance at all. But if it's like our white whale, we'll feel monumental resistance. So bearing that in mind, if we feel ourselves besieged by negativity in our own mind, that's a good sign, because that's not our voice. That's the voice of resistance. And resistance knows that whatever this project is really important to us and really will advance us on the soul level. And it wants to stop us. So that's why it's coming up with that. And the other sort of rule that I have, Rajiv, for my own self, when I hear that voice in my head and I'm asking myself, is this resistance or is it real? Is it actually make sense? Yeah. And I would say my mantra for that is, when in doubt, it's resistance. In other words, 99.9% of the time, it's our own self-sabotage trying to stop us. So the bottom line is go forward, go forward, go forward.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about going back to the battlefield analogy. The story of Arjuna, who's on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, perhaps the best warrior of his time, overcome with anxiety and fear and confusion as to what he ought to be doing. At that time, Krishna responds by saying, like, the very first words he says is, get up, like, it's your duty. You are the scorcher of your enemies. What are you doing? To which Arjuna says, look, sorry, nothing's happening right now for me. And then, as we know, that's when kind of the science of you could say resistance, or that transformation for the higher self happens. That sort of scenario, are you able to maybe just tell us what sort of state Arjun would have been in? Because and I know, because this is something that you've written a whole novel on, and there's been a movie around this. So, like, what sort of state must he have been in?
Well, now you probably will know the Gita much better than I do, and your opinion of it and analysis of it is maybe a lot deeper than mine. But here's my version of it.
Mm-hmm.
That when Arjuna looks across and the battle lines and he sees the enemies and he names them, right? That the names that he gives them are actual names, but they also mean vices as well, right? They also mean arrogance, complacency, fear, the lack of self-belief, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, they're kind of metaphors. So when Krishna tells him to slay those enemies, if we think of it in terms of the inner war, he's not really talking about killing human beings, and he's talking about the tendencies within our own heart, our own self-sabotage. He's really talking about resistance. Yeah. So those enemies represent Arjuna's resistance. And the idea that when Krishna says to slay them without mercy, I have already slain them, right? It won't be you slaying them. I have already slain them. But then he means to look within and to confront those voices that would stop you from becoming your higher self. And the other thing that to me is my interpretation of the Gita is that the bad thing that these enemies are going to do if Arjuna doesn't defeat them is they will separate Arjuna from Krishna. In other words, it's those two levels. It's that what Krishna is talking about again is yoga in the sense, right, of a union. Mm-hmm. And so the personification is Arjuna, those bad things are going to separate you from me. This is Krishna talking. And so I think that's what an artist does. The higher level, the Krishna level, is the fully realized self-realization, right? The fully realized human who has moved out of the lower level and into the higher level, and a union with the divine, a union with God. Mm. So that's my interpretation of it. And I feel just when I'm sitting down to work, to write at the keyboard, that I'm in a war. That it's a battlefield. And there's that analogy of the army with the chariots across. That's exactly what it feels like to me. Only, it's this. And I feel that I have to be a warrior in my own way, an inner warrior, and find whatever tools or weapons I can to slay those enemies. But the goal is union with a higher level. The goal, if it's art, it's producing art. That's really a gift to our brothers and sisters.
If I may say that, your explanation that you give has better informed my understanding of, the situation on the battlefield, and that sort of union. I suppose I'm using the distinction between the amateur and the pro. Uh-huh. Would you say that's the right, it's that transition that perhaps Arjuna is going through, we're all trying to go through.
Yes, I think so. I mean, when you're talking about amateur and pro, one of the things, principles that's in the war of art, if we say that there is such a thing as resistance and that it's this very powerful diabolical enemy, and the next question is, well, how do you defeat it? And the answer that I give is that in the war of art is, in a nutshell, turn pro. Switch your mindset from being an amateur meaning that when adversity strikes, you quit. That you only show up one day a week and you sort of put in a half-hearted effort. That's the way an amateur works. But a pro shows up every day and gives it his all, like in a martial arts practice, right? You show up every time you walk into the dojo and you give it your all, right? You leave your personal problems outside and you just focus and you pay attention to the sensei. And I think that's what Krishna is saying to Arjuna, because over and over again through the Gita, he says things to Arjuna like, I will never leave you. I'm always with you. You know, you may think that I can't see you as you're doing your things, but I see you always. And he's, so in other words, he's always saying, come to me. You know, those who follow lesser teachers go unto them, my devotees, Arjuna, come unto me, he says, right? I'm giving you actually that's Yogananda's translation of that verse. But so what Krishna in essence is saying, he's urging the practice of yoga, not just, hatha yoga or asana yoga, but the search for union with the divine. And he's saying, give yourself over to that. In other words, be a professional. Don't just sit in meditation or contemplation for 10 minutes and then go up and have an ice cream cone. Really, commit yourself to this, to reaching me. That's how I understand it to mean. And so that is the professional attitude in my eye, as opposed to the amateur. And in terms of being an artist, it means, showing up every day and doing the work, not not quitting when the going gets tough, and, being a pro. What a pro means, we all know what that means.
Maybe, I think we've had a question come in as well, but maybe an explanation of this distinction between the amateur and the pro. And what I particularly liked was this thing that sometimes the root of the word amateur is interesting as well. Perhaps you could just explain that distinction.
This is sort of an old, I would make it, amateur comes from the Latin root to love, right? Amo, amasamat. And what it sort of means is the amateur, let's say an amateur tennis player, that he plays just for the love of the game. Whereas a professional, this is what to me is an old definition, whereas the professional plays for money, right? The professional might not really love it, but he's good or she's good, so they play for money. But I would put it in a different way. I would say that if you really love the game, you would commit to it heart and soul, and you would turn pro. You would be a professional. To me, the fact that the amateur kind of dabbles in it, whatever the sport is, and then puts it aside, and it's not really their central calling, that's not really going to get the job done, I think. And so I think if you really loved something, you would commit yourself to it wholeheartedly, like a professional does. To me, when I think of professional, I don't think of money at all. You can turn pro without having anything to do with money. It's just in your mind, you go, I'm a pro. I'm not going to let adversity knock me down. I'm going to, if you think of it in another analogy I sometimes use is if you think about athletes, professional athletes, like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or something like that. One of the things about a professional athlete is they play hurt. A professional athlete, this sort of goes back to a little bit of your perfectionism thing there, Rajiv, where you want everything to be just perfect. The professional athlete is always hurt. They've always got an ankle that's sprained. They've got a broken finger, their back is tweaked, but they don't, in other words, it's not a perfect situation, but they've got to play. And a pro plays hurt. A pro knows that there's never going to be that perfect moment. It's always going to be something. Even if we think of it on the battlefield, I mean, a warrior is always wounded one way or another, or it's cold, or they don't have any food, or they don't have enough, their weaponry isn't right, or they're wounded, but they have to keep fighting. And that's, I think, true for us on every level. Like if we're doing a life of contemplation or meditation, in the morning it might be freezing cold. It might, our baby is crying. We can't pay the rent. COVID is out there, but we got to sit, right? We have to, that's the if you're fully committed, that's what a professional does. And a professional knows that nothing is ever going to be perfect. The perfect moment is not going to happen, but we got to do it anyway. And then you find, of course, some days, I don't know if you're a gym person at all, Rajiv, but I'm a big gym person. And many times the day you get to the gym that you think, I hate it today, I don't feel good. Those are your best days. You suddenly have a great day. So that's what I mean when I say professional as opposed to amateur.
The one thing that I've noticed is, either in my own creative endeavor or watching other people is, when we say the love of something, I suppose the amateur has they hold on so much, they find their work so precious that they either can't let go, or if they let go, they're over invested in its success and failure. Would you say that a pro is they've done the work and they've let it go almost as an act of generosity, that look, there you go, world, it's no longer mine, you could do with it whatever you want to do? Is that a sort of the mindset that a pro would have?
I think so. I think you hit it right on the head, Ajit. That's perfect. And the idea of an amateur loving their stuff so much that they can't let it go or whatever, that's a form of resistance. That's just like the thing you articulated before about it's got to be perfect, right? Yeah. Whereas a pro, like going back to my agent who said, close is good enough, give it to me. I don't know if you're familiar with Seth Godin. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
I mean, one of his I'm a big admirer of him. And one of the words that he uses is the word ship, meaning to, like, if you're Steve Jobs and you've invented the iPhone, right? And it's now time to release it to the marketplace. It's never been there before. You're going to ship it, right? The boxes are going to go from the factory. And that's the moment where you're going to be judged. Now people are going to say, right? And a lot of times people are so afraid to ship it, whatever it is, that they don't ship it at all. And I think a professional realizes this iPhone is just one of the things I'm going to do in my life. I've already done the next thing. So this is ready. It's as good as it's going to get. Let's ship it. Let's get it out there and let it be judged. And if it's found wanting, we'll fix whatever we have to fix. You're right, that over precious clinging of an amateur is a form of resistance. Resistance loves that because it's going to stop the person from doing, what they were meant to do.
There's a Sanskrit word for having a love for something, which is called rag, and the opposite is virag or vairagya, which means detachment. And I think sometimes even though we know it bodes us well to be slightly detached from our work, it can come across as we're not interested or we're not passionate about it. That's something that I faced as well, where my best work comes when I'm just taking a step back and not really caring much, which seems like a paradox.
I think it's a great. I didn't know that about those two Sanskrit words. That's great, but I do think it is a paradox, and somehow we have to hold both of those in mind at the same time. We have to absolutely love it and be passionate about it, but we also have to release it. I mean, that's what Krishna says too, right? That we have the right to our labor, but not to the fruits of our labor. Because in the end, we're just embodied souls on a journey, right? And these projects or works that we produce, as important as they are to us and as important as they are as gifts for other people, they're really, if you look at it from Krishna's point of view, they're just things that happen along the way, right? They're just shadows and light. So I do think we have to hold those two ideas together. Both true.
One of the things, and perhaps we can sort of talk more about the warrior archetype and what sort of really what that means. You know, the two hardest things that I find is one, overcoming praise and blame, right? Or overcoming, you know, that criticism, because we all take things personally. I think we've alluded to that. And the second one is patience. Again, it's the new year. We've made a resolution, and within 2 weeks, I've stopped doing my morning exercises. I've stopped, started to eat, bread again, which I said I'll cut down on. Like, it's just even simple things like that. Like, patience is I know they say patience is a virtue, but patience is a extreme virtue to have.
I couldn't agree more, Rajiv. You really hit the nail on the head. And if you think of the virtues of a warrior, patience is one of the primary virtues. And even if you think about a hunter, which is really a form of a warrior, or even a wild animal that's hunting. I mean, a hawk or an animal that's sort of waiting on its prey will be so patient. They just wait, and that's nature. They wait, and a hunter will get in his blind or his covert or whatever you call it, and if he gets bored and goes away, he doesn't make a kill. And if you watch even like lions and leopards and cheetahs will just sit there forever, just waiting, So it's definitely a real virtue that we as humans are not our whole society is impatient, and it cultivates impatience in everything, right? Convenience is everything, right? We want to send away for a book, boy, it better be there tomorrow, right? Whereas I think in previous generations, patience was taught a little more from parent to son. But I think I really try to cultivate my own patience. I'm naturally not patient, but let's say you're writing a book or you're making a movie. You're in for a 3-year, 2-year, siege. And at the very start, you have to say to yourself, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I have to husband my resources, and I have to be patient. And it's these days, not many people are, but the people who are the ones that have a big advantage over the ones who are not.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of questions that have come in. One is, when you're obsessed with your purpose, how do you actually switch off? And do you need to switch off? So it's perhaps not so much about a particular project, but about your purpose, let's say.
That's a great question. One of the things I've found, like, let's say I'm writing a book, right? It's going to be a 2-year operation. When I finish the day, I forget about it. The office is closed. I just completely let it go. And the reason I'm doing that is I want my unconscious to work on it and not me. And I know that if I obsess about it, I'm lying in bed thinking, that's really counterproductive. I remember, I don't know have you ever read a book called Journal of a Novel by John Steinbeck?
No, I haven't.
It's a great thing. It's while he was writing East of Eden or something like that. In the morning, he would just take 20 minutes and he would kind of write a little journal about what happened the day before and da-da-da-da. It's a really good book. And one of the things he said was, it's the falsest kind of economy to try to work too hard at the end of the day. He said, you reach the point of diminishing returns and you only hurt yourself. And he says, I always want to let the well fill back up overnight. And I thought that was a great thing. So it's part of a professional's attitude, I think, to be able to compartmentalize a little bit, to work really hard when you got to work, and then shut down and just, read a book, have fun, go out, sleep, whatever.
There is that sort of kind of, we do come from that culture, and it doesn't help with our 9-to-5 lives when we're constantly on the go and more is demanded. And here comes the other paradox, which is the more you do, the more is then expected of you, and it's just a vicious cycle that's difficult to overcome. So tell us a bit more about the warrior archetype. You're running a series of videos. What's that about then?
Like I said, when I sit down to do my work as an artist, I try to embrace a kind of a warrior mindset and to inculcate in myself the warrior virtues, because it is a war. It's a war against resistance. It's a war against our own self-sabotage. And that enemy will kill you. It will kill you. It won't just stop you it'll kill you. So I sort of enumerate in my own mind those warrior virtues, like patience is one, as we were talking about. If I'm starting on a long project, I set myself up, I'm going to go all the way. Courage is another, a warrior virtue. Selflessness is another warrior virtue. And the idea, like when I'm working on something, I really feel like I'm trying, it's a gift. Every day I'm trying to do something that other people, that readers or whatever, it's going to give them something. They're going to read it and go, oh, this is fun, or this is scary, or whatever. So selflessness is another thing, a warrior virtue. Another warrior virtue is the willing embracing of adversity, right? A great warrior is not intimidated by cold or heat or whatever, or the opposition. Whereas we in this society, we're taught to seek comfort and ease and convenience. The warrior attitude is completely the opposite of that. It's like, Shackleton's famous thing when he went to the South Pole, where he had that little advertisement men wanted for, dangerous duty, long darkness, freezing cold, small chance of glory if we succeed. And the next morning there were like 8,000 people lined up to sign up, right? And that was the willing embracing of adversity, a warrior virtue. And so I think as an artist, or like a martial artist, right? When you go in to the dojo, you're willing to get bounced around a little bit, you're willing to sweat, you're willing to feel pain. So that's another thing that I try to inculcate in myself. So this video series of mine was just sort of an exploration for myself, as much as anyone else, of what it means to have the warrior mindset. But let me go beyond that for a minute, because sometimes I'll give you another parallel for the warrior is a mother. There never was a warrior like a mother. And if you think of, if you're writing a book, if you're an artist, you can't do better than to think of yourself as a mother. Number one, a mother is giving birth to something, right? Whatever that project is, whatever that worth is. And the mother is willing to sacrifice her own life for that newborn thing to be born. And we all know about mothers, that if a mother will run into a burning building to save her child, if her child is under a car, a 100-pound mother will lift up, a 5,000-pound car with her two hands, So there never was. So another way to look at that, I could also see thinking of this as trying to inculcate the virtues of a mother, of love, of patience, of the willing embracing of adversity, of self-sacrifice, of giving, and also of taking care of oneself, eating right, getting sleep, because you've got that baby inside you, and that baby is your work of art or your project or your business or whatever.
Wow, I never thought of that, using the example of a mother as an artist or this kind of selfless leader. That's
probably the perfect one, because a mother gives birth, and that's what we are doing as artists.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're serving this new life that's coming through us.
Yeah. If there's sort of maybe 3 take-home messages for me and for anybody that's listening, like, people that are at a very kind of rudimentary stage in their creative or their leadership journey, what would you say?
The first thing I would say is to recognize that there is this force that I call resistance with a capital R. And that the rest of your life, you're going to be fighting that force. It will never go away. And you will never accomplish anything, unless you can find your own way to overcome that force. That's the real goal. The art will come, the music will come. You'll figure out how to do it if you can just teach yourself to sit down. The second thing I would say is that when you feel that this is another thing that we haven't talked about this at all, but that this force of resistance, it comes second. What comes first is the dream. I make this analogy, and the dream being the book you want to write, the movie you want to make, the change you want to make in your life. You want to run a marathon, whatever it is. And I think of that as like a tree in the middle of a meadow is the dream. And as soon as that dream appears, a shadow is going to appear. If it's in the sunshine, right? Yeah. But in the shadow is resistance. But when the shadow would not be there if there wasn't a dream. Yeah. And the bigger the dream, the bigger the resistance. So if you feel the resistance, it's a positive. It tells you that you've got a big, big dream. And the last thing I would say, the takeaway, is that it's not really the act of overcoming resistance and of becoming a working artist is not, there's a very much a mystical element to it. There is, where do ideas come from, et cetera, et cetera. But what we can control, you and I, is to attack it as professionals and to show up every day, to do our work. When the day's over, close the office, but not be precious, not be overly perfectionist, but to do our work just like a blue-collar bricklayer or a mechanic or somebody, building a wall. He just puts in one brick and another brick and another brick, and after a while, there's a wall. Yeah. In a good sense, not a bad sense of a wall, not the Pink Floyd sense of a wall. So those would be my 3 takeaways, Rajiv.
Fantastic. Look, Steve, it's been an absolute honor to have you, and just really insightful. Like, so many more things for me have come out of this book just through this conversation that we've had. And it's just, I remember I got given this maybe about 6 years ago or so, and I read it within an hour. I read it and I thought, wow, this is just exactly, when you don't put a name to this enemy,
yeah,
it becomes but you've given it a name, and for that I think we're all very grateful for your contribution.
Thanks for having me, Rajiv. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and the audience, and I hope our talk has been helpful to somebody.
Absolutely, and
I
hopefully
can put a little plug. Can I put in a little plug?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Coming in March.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully one day we'll be able to meet in person, and
that would be great.
Chat some more and
back and forth across the pond.
Absolutely.
Stay soon.
I hope to speak with you soon, and stay safe. And
you too. Take care of yourself, and we'll keep in touch. And my best to everybody.